welcome. You're watching Newsline Live with me, Neha Khanna, and joining me on the show today is a special guest. We have with us Australia's High Commissioner to India, Philip Green. High Commissioner Green, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure.
An absolute pleasure to have you. Let me begin by quoting to you what Australian parliamentarian Andrew Charlton has said in his book titled Australia's Pivot to India. I found his description of the India-Australia relationship rather interesting. He says, it changed and grew incrementally through 4 distinct phases, which he describes as acquaintances, friends, family and partners before it arrived at the current state of play. There are many who say that the relationship has undergone a complete transformation in less than a decade, from distrust, suspicion and disinterest to a relationship that's now driven by partnership and bipartisan support. Do you agree with that assessment, and what do you think took us so long to actually get here?
Look, I've been engaging with Indian diplomats for all of my long diplomatic career, and I can say that Australia and India have always been friends. But you're right, the current era is really quite a step change from what we've had before, because now we are strategic partners and very strong economic partners. And also we have the benefit of the human bridge, the nearly 1 million people of Indian origin who live in Australia. I think what's really interesting, Neha, is that this step up in Australia-India relations has come faster than any step up for any of our major partners has ever done. You know, we've got great other friends in the world, the UK, the United States, Japan, New Zealand. But those relationships stepped up gradually over a long period. The India-Australia links have gone very fast upward, and now we describe India as one of our top-tier security partners.
That's good to know. Let's hope we can make up for lost time. And I'm very glad you bring up the human bridge, because we must dwell on that in just a moment. Before that, High Commissioner, I want to talk about the trade ties between the two countries. Now, the ECTA, or the Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, was signed between the two countries in April 2022. It came into force in December that year. Let's look at the volume of trade between India and Australia. In 2021-22, Australia's trade with India stood at 46 billion Australian dollars. It has been a significant improvement over time, no doubt, but it still makes up just 4% of Australia's trade. Now you compare this with China, which stands at 27%, or a whopping 285 billion Australian dollars. Now I understand the Chinese economy is far bigger than India's, but as growing partners, how do you think the two countries can bridge this yawning gap?
Well, Rome wasn't built in a day, but I'm very optimistic about the bridge that we're building. Over the last 5 years, Australia-India trade has gone up 65%. And now that we have the first phase of our trade agreement in place, just over the last few months of this year, we've seen big increases in Indian exports of apparel, more than 25%, of steel and iron products, nearly 27%. So I'm very optimistic that we're on the right track, but the future is huge. And because Australia has many of the complementary skills and competencies that India needs for its growth, high quality education, high quality energy and resources. We're the biggest producer of critical minerals in the world. That's an opportunity for us to drive this partnership forward. And guess what? We've got a plan for that, because the second phase of the free trade agreement, which I'm determined that we get resolved, will bring us into even closer economic partnership, and I want to see those statistics continue to rise fast.
All right. Let's certainly hope they do. You know, let's talk about the security aspect of this relationship. India and Australia are members of the Quad. Would you say that, you know, Quad as an entity is contributing significantly to regional stability? How do you think it is adding to security in the Indo-Pacific? And also, if I might add, do you believe both Quad and AUKUS are, in a sense, designed to counter the threat, the security threat posed by China? That's the way many see it.
Look, the Quad for us is not against somebody, it's what we're for. And these 4 big democracies in our region are for the rule of law. They're for transparency in international relations. They're for the role of multilateral institutions like ASEAN, like the Indian Ocean Region Association. They're most importantly for might is not right. And the character of our region shouldn't be dominated by the mighty, but for all of the countries of our region to have a role in the direction and character of our region. That is a vision that Australia and India and Japan and the United States happen to share. I think that's actually been quite a powerful impact on all of the other countries in the region and the way in which they see the future of our region. But yes, we need to do more. You talk about AUKUS. We are troubled by the development of weapons globally and particularly in our region. We are seeing the fastest uptick in defence capabilities across the region in our lifetimes, in fact, in any time since the Second World War. So for us, it's important that we work with our friends and our partners to have the defence capabilities to provide deterrence, so that no power can seek to threaten our shores in a way that would undermine our security.
Spoken like a true diplomat, no reference there to China's expansionism, as many call it, and China is clearly not amused, at the prospect of either Quad or AUKUS coming into existence. But let's now move on to India-Russia ties. Why do I bring it up? For the obvious reasons. There's a war that's going on, Russia-Ukraine war that has gone on for more than 2 years now. High Commissioner, how do you perceive, how does Australia perceive India's closeness to Russia at a time when Russia is quite obviously a pariah for the Western world? The fact that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is about to embark on a visit to Russia at almost the same time as the NATO summit in Washington.
India will make its own choices in the way it engages with other players in the world, as Australia makes its own choices. I'm listening very carefully to my Indian friends inside and outside government to explain exactly what explains these developments. But let me just be very clear about Australia. We oppose absolutely Russia's illegal, immoral and completely unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine. We are supporting Ukraine and we want to put Ukraine into a position where it can end this war on terms that suit Ukraine. That's appropriate. We live in a time of our world where we need to be concerned about the power of the mighty and how they can affect small and medium-sized countries like Australia. So we back Ukraine and we absolutely decry a member of the Permanent Five who has chosen to undertake an illegal, immoral and totally unjustified invasion of a neighbour.
But would you say you understand India asserting its strategic autonomy in this regard and protecting what it calls its historical ties with Russia?
Look, I understand strategic autonomy. I also understand India's multi-alignment policy. In many ways they make good sense, and there is much in those policies that allows Australia and India to engage in new and powerful ways. India will make its own choices about individual visits and particular relationships. I'm focused on getting on with the things where Australia and India agree and where we can make a palpable difference for the good in the world.
All right. High Commissioner, you referred earlier in the interview to the human bridge that exists between India and Australia. Let's therefore talk about students, because they, are a very important component of that human bridge that you referred to. Now, Australia's Deakin University has the distinction of being the first foreign university to set up a campus in India. It's in Gujarat. The two countries signed the Australia Mobility Agreement in 2024, this year itself, for migration of skilled labour. Now, it is also well known that Australia is amongst the top 5 higher education destinations for Indian students. However, the trouble, High Commissioner, is that your country in recent times has made it extremely difficult for international students to get a visa. Why do I say that? You have more than doubled the visa fee for them. From the 1st of July, international student visa fee has risen to 1,600 Australian dollars from 710 Australian dollars. Visitor visa holders and students with temporary graduate visas are banned from applying onshore for a student visa. The amount of savings that international students need to get a visa was raised in May to 29,710 Australian dollars from a little more than 24,000. Second such increase in 7 months. Do you not believe that this could prove to be a deterrence for a lot of Indian students who may be forced to look elsewhere at other countries, Canada, the United States, maybe Europe? And do you not believe it could adversely impact the Australian economy as well?
So the first thing to say is these are measures which apply globally and they're not directed at India. And the second thing to say, honestly, Naya, as a parent, I know what it's like to educate my own children. I know the sacrifices that parents make, and I empathise with the fact that these costs will, albeit modestly, increase the cost of education in Australia. But the third thing to say is education in Australia is worth it. And the fact that more than 110,000 Indians are there in Australia at the moment, studying, I think enjoying our environment, getting a very high quality education, and being able to return to India and contribute to this country's great economic future and to their families' economic well-being. These are positive things, and they're positive things that will continue to go on. We've increased the entry charge to get a visa to come to study in Australia. That's because the costs of making education available in Australia are increasing, and the costs, frankly, of keeping our visa scheme with a strong sense of integrity are also growing. But we're very confident that Indians will continue to choose Australian education because of the great benefit of the education itself and because of the excellent experience that Indians will have in Australia. I'm very confident that will go on in very large measure.
You say that education in Australia is worth it, and I'm not saying it's not, but I just want to quote what the Universities Australia CEO, Luke Shihai, has said. This is not good for our economy or our universities, both of which rely heavily on international student fees. This is what Shihai has been quoted as saying, and international education is one of Australia's largest export industries and was worth 36.5 billion Australian dollars to the economy in 2022-23. Are there concerns that this could take a hit, and do you believe there is any possibility that some sort of a concession could be offered to Indian students going forward?
Well, there already were concessions which were offered to Indian students in the context of the first phase free trade agreement, which we call ECTA. And good on the Indian government for having enshrined those in a treaty, which Australia is, of course, delivering precisely as we were required to. Look, I'm very confident that the Australian education industry will continue to be profitable, and I'm very confident that that will continue to be welcome for Indian families who will find that there is value in Australian education, both in terms of the high quality skills that people get access to, but also in the enjoyment that they will have of our environment. But one other thing now, which is really important. Indians being educated in Australia is good, but our education partnership should not be a one-way street. And that's why I'm very proud when all of the universities in the world were invited by the government of India and the government of Gujarat to establish foreign branch campuses in Gift City. And guess what? 2 such universities have answered that call, and they're both Australian. The Deakin University and the University of Wollongong. So our education partnership is important, and it will continue to go ahead, but it shouldn't be a one-way street. And an important way forward is for high quality Australian education to be available in India at a lower cost for the India consumer, but also achieving great results for the Indian student.
That's a fair point. It should be a two-way street. High Commissioner Green, let's now talk about a couple of issues that have been somewhat controversial in recent times. There was an ABC documentary that stirred quite a controversy here in India. ABC News claimed it had uncovered, and I'm quoting them, the long arm of the Indian state in Australia. In other words, alleged attempts by Indian intelligence agents to interfere in Australia's national security. The Indian government, Ministry for External Affairs, has responded to this, saying it is nothing but blatant untruths. It appears to serve a particular agenda to malign India. I want to simply ask you, what is the stand of the Australian government on this?
Well, it's not for me to comment on individual pieces of journalism by individual news outlets. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation makes its own editorial decisions. But I will say this, coverage of India is very important to Australians. It's important to the million people of Indian origin who live in Australia, and it's important to the other 25 million people in Australia for whom India is an increasingly close friend and partner. So I favour more coverage of India in Australia. I favour more balanced coverage of India in Australia, and I'd be very strongly supporting a range of journalists being able to offer a range of views about India in the coming months.
All right, but considering that the Five Eyes countries have spoken repeatedly, at least since the G20 summit last year, about the alleged presence of Indian spies in many of those countries. Of course, the Canadian Prime Minister has been very vocal about it. I would still want to ask you, what is Australia's stand on this issue, even if we keep aside the ABC documentary for a moment? Look, from the security viewpoint.
Now, we've said what we've said about these matters. I don't propose to repeat them. Your viewers can see them online. We're getting ahead with having a strong security and economic partnership with India. That's what's vital for our future. We've had the conversations that we need to have, and now we're moving forward. India is a vital partner for Australia, both in terms of security, in terms of economics, and in terms of people-to-people relations, and that's our focus.
Okay, India is an important partner, and security cooperation is important in this bilateral relationship. So let me ask you this. Khalistani separatism is a very sensitive issue for India. In countries like the UK, Canada, America, and also Australia, there have been multiple instances where entities that represent the Khalistani secessionist movement have not only held protest marches, but also engaged in instances of vandalism. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, last year, some of these elements even disrupted India's Independence Day celebrations in Australia. Now, the government of India's stand is very clear that these elements pose a security threat to India, and therefore Western governments, especially friendly countries, cannot justify these activities on their soil in the name of freedom of expression. Where does the Australian government stand on this?
Well, firstly, I don't think it's true that anybody disrupted the Indian celebration of its independence in Canberra. That went on ahead very comfortably.
It was reported in the media.
Went comfortably indeed. But what's important here, Naya, is that communities from abroad, wherever they're from, whether they're from India or from some other country, need to feel safe in our country and need to feel free to express their views in a way that is non-violent. That's a core part of our democracy, that people are able to demonstrate and express their views. That's vital for us as the way in which we manage our multiculturalism. Everyone has a voice, but it has to be done in a certain context. And the context is this, that we utterly excoriate violence in any of these contexts. And our security authorities, our intelligence authorities, our multicultural authorities, our foreign relations authorities are working every day to make sure that these things don't bubble over and give rise to violence or tension between communities. That's enormously important to us. It's a journey that we've been on with many migrant communities in Australia. The Indian migrant community is in Australia, vitally important to us. The fastest growing migrant group in Australia. It's important that they feel safe and free to express their views. It's also important that India's diplomatic premises, this is not just important, this is paramount, that India's diplomatic premises are always safe and secure. And you can be assured the Australian Federal Police are working on that every day.
And my follow-up question to that would be, a lot of these Khalistani separatists have openly issued threats to Indian diplomats in multiple countries. I can tell you it's happened in Canada for sure. If there were to be violence of any kind, or a direct threat to any Indian diplomat or their family or the Indian mission, the government of Australia would take it very seriously and act on it.
It's Australian prosecutorial and criminal authorities will act precisely in accordance with Australian law on this matter, and violence cannot be part of any group's pursuit of its interest in Australia.
All right, fair enough. High Commissioner, we've talked about the Russia-Ukraine war. I think we also need to talk about the other big war that's raging in the country currently, the Israel-Hamas war that has now raged on for more than 9 months. My question to you is, how does Australia perceive this war, the fact that more than 37,000 Palestinians have now been killed in the war? Of course, what happened in Israel on the 7th of October was horrific, but equally horrific is the fact that 37,000 Palestinians have lost their lives, that the Gaza Strip has been bombed back to the Stone Age. I will ask you a direct question. Do you believe what Israel is doing currently is right?
We're enormously troubled by the situation in Gaza, and the humanitarian cost to women, children and men in Gaza is not acceptable. We have strongly supported for some time a ceasefire, and the American proposal for a ceasefire we fully back at the moment. At the same time, it's really important, it's vital that Hamas end its terrorism in the region, and that there is an unconditional release of the hostages who are still held. Underlying all of that, it reminds us that a sustainable peace in Israel and Palestine must be achieved. And the only way we see to get to that is a two-state solution, and we strongly favour a two-state solution which would enable Israel to live in peace and security with its neighbours and give the Palestinian people their rights.
I'm glad you support the two-state solution and a ceasefire, which has been completely elusive, but there are many, including the United Nations, that have said that Israel has committed war crimes and violated the international humanitarian law. Do you believe Israel has done that?
I'll leave that for judicial authorities, and as you know, the ICJ is deliberating that matter right now. What matters, and you referred to the UN has backed the ceasefire proposal of the United States, and Australia backs the ceasefire proposal of the United States. At the moment, that is our core ambition.
All right, I respect that. Let's just shift our focus to something entirely different in a lighter vein. You know, when an Indian is talking to an Australian, you can't not talk about cricket.
Indeed.
And I certainly hope that you are a cricket fan.
I am.
Like almost every Indian
I
is.
am.
Very glad to know that, High Commissioner. So my question to you is, and I can say this with a lot of pride, what did you make of India lifting the T20 World Cup? And there are many in India who said the fact that we knocked Australia out of the T20 World Cup was revenge for you defeating us in the ODI World Cup final. How do you see that?
Well, of course it was. And, you know, congratulations to the Indian team and to all of India. Great success. I think the reality is that this is now the great rivalry in international cricket between Australia and India. Certainly the way in which I see Cricket Australia's ambitions is to try to live up to and perhaps better India as often as we can. And another opportunity is coming quite soon. Mm-hmm. So what's really exciting for me now is that This year, we will see the Border Gavaskar Series
yes.
trophy played out in Australia between December and January. And we as the Australian government are playing our part in this, because that'll be a great people-to-people opportunity. But we are working with the Centre for Australia-India Relations, with Cricket Australia, with Star Sports, to put a range of activities around each of the matches to make sure that those odd Australians and Indians who aren't interested in cricket have something also that will draw them to the stadiums, to make sure that, let's say, Australian business leaders and even political leaders have the opportunity to meet on the sidelines of cricket matches. You know, we say in our bilateral relationship, we need to use cricket to get beyond cricket.
Yes.
And that's what we're trying to do in the context of the Border Gavaskar Trophy this year.
Since you refer to it as a great rivalry, how does it compare to the Ashes?
My own view is that it has now shaded the Ashes, but perhaps even more importantly, ask yourself this question, you know, where is the global centre of cricket now? And there was one time we would have said that was Lord's. Maybe some people might say the Melbourne Cricket Ground, but I think now, without a doubt, the global centre of cricket is here in India. You know, with the IPL and the quality of your team, the fact that it brings players from around the world, including the best from my nation. It's an extraordinary thing, and it takes me back, my first experience of India, decades ago, when I backpacked across this country from Kolkata to Jaisalmer by train and by bus, and two things were inevitable in any of those journeys when I would sit opposite another Indian family. Number one, someone would offer me some delicious food, thinking that I was an underfed Australian, and there would be a conversation about
Indians
cricket.
love to feed, I guess.
Indians love to feed, and we love to talk about cricket. So it's a wonderful, precious part of our relationship, and I think it now is the core of the Australian rivalry in cricket.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, High Commissioner Philip Green. Thank you so much for speaking to News 9.
My pleasure entirely. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Cheers.